Welcome to the Intellectual Anarchy podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
And I'm Catherine Cruz, and I'm just a curious cat.
Yeah, so here we really talk about the challenge of going from deep science to human-centered design, a product that delights people, that does exactly what it's supposed to do. Two really hard things to do on, together. And together is probably the operative term that's difficult because they have to have a mutual respect for each other because they're both doing something that is really important, that's really difficult. But that's exactly what's required. One team can do it, can do science and do something that, is profound, but you've got to distill it to something that people can really use. That's affordable, that's practical, that makes sense for the way people want to do it. And that is the hard thing. And that's what we do at Oceanit. I mean, that's what we continue to work at, we continue to build on. We're building out the green team, the one that deals with humans and products and design and that kind of thing. It's a different skill set. It's about dealing with human nature, what people say versus what they do, how they behave versus the way they think they behave, all that kind of stuff. It's not always so obvious, but you have to be a very astute observer, right? It's a very human-centered kind of thing. And that is difficult. And they've got to work with the science team. And a lot of the folks on the deep science side, they think they've kind of got it all figured out.
The blue zone.
In the blue zone, but they just don't talk to real people. They kind of think they do, but they don't really go out there and watch and listen and engage. And so getting those two to work together is what we do. Right. And that takes work.
So their focus is very narrow, and rightly so, because they're focusing on some problem, but then they don't open up.
Yeah, they can be brilliant in understanding science and complexity and math and physics and all kinds of things, but to have them really understand the human condition, that's hard. And with things that are really disruptive, you've got to go deeper than just filling out a form. You've got to be an observer of human behavior. And then you've got to be able to distill the human behavior into things that you can execute to make something that works with those humans.
Right. So how are they going to respond to this product?
Right. Yeah. How are they going to be delighted and inspired? And that is, an art and a science. And so some really good examples out there with, Steve Jobs was great on the human-centered design. He wasn't creating the disruptive science, but he brought it to everybody in a way that was interesting, surprising, and delighting, right? It was very delightful. You look at the way an iPhone works, you say, wow, that's so cool. When it first came out, it's like, the whole thing is a screen? Really? That's so cool. To get to that takes a lot of work. And it isn't just bolt of lightning hits somebody in the head. It's work. It's being an astute observer and a listener, understanding human nature, understanding what delights humans, all those things.
I guess I'm thinking too of, what was it he was really into? The fonts?
Yes.
And that kind of appealed to people, right? It was just
but even the idea of fonts, it's like, font you may make a letter, but you also are expressing a symbol, and different features on the symbol impact how people feel about what they see. So the subtlety and the nuance of that is really interesting because because like somebody could just argue it's just the letter A, but yet when you make it this way, or you use some of these it's kind of like the art you see in Japanese culture, right? Where
the calligraphy, right? Yeah.
With calligraphy, because it's beautiful, it's elegant. Even if I can't understand it, you can look at it and say, wow, that's very cool. That's what he understood. And so I'm sure in the beginning, people would dismiss the font thing like that's a waste of everybody's time. What I think he understood was how it delights people.
Right.
And those are very nuanced things, but building over time, you take that idea and then you build it into all these different features. Pretty soon you build something that's like, wow, this is really cool. That's what you're trying to get to. That is hard. So it's hard to do the basic science and turn it into like, I can levitate a car, watch this. But make it something that delights people, that's hard. Because you got to, again, understand people. It's like you've got to, I was recently in Paris and went to some of the museums, and I'm kind of looking at the art and different ways they display it. It speaks to you, right? Different artists and different ways of doing things communicate this idea of excitement or sadness or happiness or all kinds of emotions come with that. That's a hard thing to do. So the green zone can deal with a lot of those issues around design. It could be simple as proportions. When you take something and you put it into 3 or 4 buckets, and how do you arrange those things on a piece of paper? It sounds ridiculous and silly. Yet there's certain ways to do it where you might look at it, it feels really good. Now, why does it feel really good? Some people can just intuitively do that. Like we've got some people in the green team that are just naturally gifted in those areas where they can just understand the proportions and the shapes that make people delighted. But you've got to then do that across a whole bunch of features on any kind of a new innovation.
Yeah, so you're checking off the boxes, but kind of in a subtle way, right?
And where it's interesting is those people are really, really important because they understand how a technology will delight somebody. The engineers are also really important because they're doing something that's really, really interesting, but you've got to find a way to bring those two together. And so we're talking about consumer applications, one thing, right, like a phone, or industrial applications. We think the same thing applies. It should be, beautiful, elegant, balanced, interesting, intuitive, those kinds of things. So how do you get there? That's a journey. And I appreciate it. We're trying to make sure that everybody in the blue zone understands that. Again, back to this common language. If they understand why the people in the green zone are so special, and if the folks in the green zone understand why the folks in the blue zone are so special, they respect each other. So we're going for respect and good communication versus whether one guy can do the other guy's work or that kind of thing. We don't think the guys in the blue zone will be good in the green zone and vice versa, but they have to respect each other. And so that's what we strive for.
Right. Can't be just dismissive.
Right.
Because you don't live in that world.
Right. Somebody will say, well, that's silly. That's trivial. That's obvious, when in fact, it isn't. And I've learned this over and over with when we bring products to life and get them in the market. It's a lot of work to bring a product to market. It's just a huge effort. And culturally, it's a different skill set. It's a different mindset. And yet, without that, you never bring the technology to life. And that's one of the things we really think about and work on here at Oceanit.
So then when your teams click, when they get to that point,
then it's really cool. And when they don't, then it's a real problem. It's like you got a referee. Because the worst thing, which I've seen in some of the spin-outs, is almost a disdain one for the other. It's like, that guy doesn't know anything. When in fact, it's like, no, what they did was remarkable, was really something. But vice versa, they need to understand why it's so important to bring it to a point of usability, practicality, economic vibe. It's got to be affordable. It can't be, it costs so much money, nobody can do it. It's got to be something that is kind of intuitive and easy. So those little features become really important. And you see it with product offerings today. And again, not to pick on Apple, but they do a really good job, at least historically they have, of making something that's delightful. You see it, you open the box, it starts with that. Looks like one of those, when you go to the Japanese restaurant, you do a box lunch or something, you open it up and everything is just perfectly wrapped and placed. It's a piece of art. And that's what Apple kind of brought to this whole thing, showing everybody why that matters. Now, a lot of people will dismiss it because you can argue, well, it costs more money. Yes. However, you've got to find a way to reduce cost and make it something that's beautiful to behold. And those are tough things to do.
I was having a conversation with somebody about microphones, and I just said, well, yeah, I mean, if you're a microphone sitting in a studio, where you have musicians, going at it, and that's one thing. But if you're out in the field every day working with a microphone in all kinds of conditions, you can take that beautiful microphone and you drop it, and it doesn't work after that. You need a workhorse. You need something that's going to deliver the signal reliably, clean, solid, and you can drop it 50 times on the floor or throw it, and it'll still work. So you get the workhorse. But yeah.
See, that's a really great example of what a real product needs to do. So if it's just up to the engineer, they say, well, of course you can't drop it. Like, why would you do that? But they've never been in the field.
Right. It's not practical. Yeah.
They've just never had that experience. And what we find is that the people that can do this, what they really need to do is just go out and spend a day watching a reporter and not even just watch them. Like, see what they actually do versus even interview them, because they might say, like they may be holding a really, say, heavy microphone or something, and they may just assume that that's their job, but it may turn out it's making their back sore, right? It's doing all these things, and they just figure, well, that just is the job.
Right.
When in fact, the designer looking at it might say, what if we made that light? What if we made it smaller? What if we did... Like, how would that make your life easier?
Right, with no cords.
But they
don't realize that if you clip a lavalier mic on somebody and you go to Alamana Beach Park, that acts as a little transmitter and you get a bigger radio station. So just the little things. You work with it. You figure out, okay, this doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But see, the work to do that is what a lot of people don't do because they dismiss it as kind of trivial. And we ran into this with Hawana. The folks that did the design for this medical device, which was really remarkable science, would meet with nurses in hotels and conferences and ask them questions, with poo-poos or food and drinks and all kinds of things in a really nice setting. The first time it was in a real hospital and somebody's in trouble in the room, the nurse's behavior was nothing like occurred in the hotel or the conference, because there's adrenaline, there's panic, there's, the split second decision making. And so this is a true story. So what happened was the nurses, because it had like 20 features and all these really cool things the engineers built into it. And they pulled the plug, and they just ripped it out because it kept beeping and making noises and doing all kinds of things. But the nurse was focused on the patient. The patient was dying in front of their eyes and didn't have time to go through all the menus. and figuring that out. So we ended up redesigning the whole thing with one button and big numbers, and that was it. But that was from spending time watching nurses. But in the beginning, they didn't do any of that in the hospital. They did it in a hotel. And so you have to be in the environment people work in. The environment matters a lot. So back to the microphone, watch them carry it through, wherever they're using it. So how's that look? But you got to watch people. You got to go to those environments. You got to put in the time to just watch. And that's what took a lot of work, believe it or not, for one of the spin-outs, to get people to show up in the hospital and just spend the day watching. Because in their minds, it was like, we already know this. Not true.
Yeah. You didn't think of this situation and that situation.
And what they go through, what it's like to live a day in those shoes. And unless you do that, you really don't understand what it means. And so that goes back to this human-centered design piece, developing a sense of empathy, active listening, going out there. That's where the whole design thinking framework is really nice, because it kind of is a nice way to understand the basic components. But I got to say, the biggest one that's generally lacking from the smart scientists and engineers is empathy. They're not empathetic to the person who is doing the job, because in their mind, they already got it figured out. And they're almost always wrong. So we've learned that almost always wrong, because they're not those people. And unless they've lived that life or they've spent time in those shoes, they're just not going to really get it. And so we got to do a lot more here at Oceanit, actually, but I encourage people to do the same thing to make that work.
So you got to build a human nature into your product. Yeah.
Yeah. So this call this morning, I was telling this group, I said, to make something truly usable, it's got to be simple, easy, stupid. It's like, if it's not obvious, if I got to sit down and spend the day reading a manual, okay, that's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that people can't do it, but most people won't do it. That's a human nature thing. It's not that they can't, it's that they won't. And it's understanding those things, right? That goes to the design.
Well, I never figured out how to, record stuff off the TV, things like that. I didn't want to take the time to do that. Yeah. So thinking about those things, but whether it's a life bed or some other product, how does it work in a real life situation? Right.
And so we've got several things we've done, but an interesting example is, and again, this will sound silly, but with this Assure 100 rapid test. So it doesn't have a dropper. So let me kind of stepping way back. First, we were doing saliva. We were developing the test. We all thought that was pretty good. But then I was watching a bunch of folks from the state legislature try to spit in a cup, only to learn they couldn't. And I'm thinking, that's silly. Can't you spit? Not everybody can spit on command. So that was the first insight. That's why we went to the nasal swab. Second is count 3 drops. That's pretty easy. 3 drops. How hard can that be? Turns out 3 drops isn't easy for some people. So we got rid of the dropper totally. So all you do is put it in and pour. You don't measure anything. And it just gives you an answer. The reason we got rid of 3 drops, even though, again, this sounds trivial, not everybody could do 3 drops.
Right. So keep it simple, stupid.
Well, it's just, but I mean, it almost sounds ridiculous, but we got rid of that dropper because we thought, just watch people do it. Not everybody, because it's just, how hard can it be? Count to 3. Well, guess what? Not everybody's able to count to 3. Depends on how you're feeling and paying attention. Are you having another conversation? Are you multitasking? All the things that go on. It turns out 3 drops is not for everybody. Now, in a scientific setting, not a problem. For the over-the-counter version, You don't have to count a thing. Just stick it in, pour it out, done. And so we eliminated that. That makes it much easier to use, and it actually makes it more accurate.
Right. So when you get to that point where you get the science part with the human nature part.
Right.
That's where yeah.
But see, in the beginning, the argument is, no, we have to do 3 because it's very precise. And then we did studies like, so let's say you absorb a little bit more in one swab and a little bit less in the other swab. Does it really matter? And how much does that compare to counting, watching people count?
Right.
Turns out watching people count, it added more variability than just stick it in the thing and pour. So, but we actually did those measurements, but the insight of saying, just cut that out.
Right. So, yeah,
I mean,
you don't need the wiggle room. Let's just.
And people can argue, the smart scientific people will say, well, it's just 3. How hard can that be? Well, guess what? They're not out there in the clinical settings and in the shopping center, all the places we did all these studies. But the team was told, watch people. And sometimes the smart folks don't want to do that because they feel they already know the answer and they think it's a waste of time. But see, these are the subtleties of this human-centered piece. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's so important. But I would say that it's missing across the board for most institutions. So national labs, universities, when it comes to moving technology out, this is a totally missing thing. When it comes to a lot of companies, very similar. But we embrace it and try to build it into what we do here. Now, not everybody's equally skilled, but see, we just continue with this common language. Not everybody may be the guy or girl watching people, but at least they know somebody does and why it's important. That's all we want. Like, we know it's important and these people are good at it because I'm not, let's say, then I don't have to do it. So telling a PhD engineer to just watch people, they may feel like, why am I doing this?
Yeah, you're wasting my time.
You're wasting my time. But then you have others that can be astute observers of human nature and human behavior. And those are special people too. They have to work together. And then they have to communicate with each other.
Right. So you got to take those ideas and, how do you apply it to your work?
Right. That's what we're doing. But it's kind of an interesting and a universal problem because, I mean, there are so many examples. And I don't know when to get started, but if you just take, every time you fly into the state of Hawaii, you fill out a paper form.
Yes.
It's kind of ridiculous. There's got to be an easier way to do this. But
they're trying.
Yes. But you can see that there's important information you could collect, which I do believe is important for the state and for managing agriculture and all kinds of things coming into an island community in the middle of the Pacific. But making it so hard to do it and so annoying to do every single time.
Right. So you have the form, but do you have a pen?
Right.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Go hit somebody up for a pen or cut your finger and do it in blood, but give them the form. It's kind of ridiculous. So there's a lot of things like that I think could be improved, but part of that is it's just really dated. Part of it is not really understanding today how people would rather do things. They could get a lot more cooperation, I think, by making it way easier, but using modern technology and things people are already accustomed to. So it's not the same as saying the example of carrying a heavy microphone and a battery pack, and so their back is sore every day. It's a little bit like that because you're forcing people to do this thing which they don't really want to do, and so you're not getting the kind of information you probably would get if it was just a lot easier. And there's tons of examples out there, but that's one that is specific to Hawaii. Every time you fly in, you fill out that silly form.
Right. So why can't we do it better?
Yeah.
Find a better way.
Yeah. It's all out there. And it's not a technology limitation. It's this human-centered design limitation. And see, most institutions don't value that. But I really think it's important. And we work on that here all the time. But boy, just think about delivering services in state and county governments, making it easier to work with, or even rethinking the way you get your driver's license. You go in and talk to the driver's license people, take a number, and sit in a room and go through those things. You could probably make it a lot easier and get more cooperation.
Right. So keep it simple.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, that's what this chapter really speaks to. And we think that to deliver technology, and what we're really trying to do with the things here at Oceanit is to bring them to the world. That becomes a really critical step, this human-centered piece.